What are some of the applications, implications, and potentialities of astrology, both now and into the future?
All of the outer planets are changing signs and are currently at the early degrees, either 0 or 1 degree of their new sign. And so a new era is being ushered in.
Welcome to the Frequency Files. Thanks for joining us as we explore the vibrations, forms, and creations and mechanisms behind them that inform the nature of existence. Deb, I know that you not only have a great knowledge of planetary frequencies, but that you've been on the spiritual path for many years. And I just want to read something that you shared with me, that frequency for you is about acknowledging the energy that we bring into a room. And of course, this is at a micro level, to a place or to a life situation and to our relationships, and the awareness of the impact that that has on our lives, on other people, and being responsible for the energy that we bring. And that the way we create is about harnessing energy to create what we need for ourselves and for others. I love how grounded and real your answer is in sharing what frequency means for you. I know so many people have different takes on that word, and of course that's one of the things that we want to explore here. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Is there anything you want to add or think is really important, or any misconceptions around the term frequency?
Yeah, I think there is a misconception out there that frequency and managing your frequency means that you should be high frequency or high vibe all the time. And that's actually not really what life is. To me, that awareness is about learning to manage your energy, learning that when you're low energy or your energy is low, how do you regulate so that you're not stuck in that? And being able to switch when necessary at choice, because there are times that we do need to be on our game and we do need to bring more energy to the situation. But this notion that you should live from that place completely, I feel like only describes part of the human experience. And that notion of people not necessarily being aware that what is it that you need? What are the things that actually work for you? Because, you know, there's a lot of conversations out there that say that high frequency looks like this or high vibe looks like this. And just actually knowing what is it that resets your system? What is it that calms you instantly when you actually need to switch off from particular states of being, and the frequency that represents, and knowing what that is for you. Because if you know that, you can do it really, really easily and very, very quickly without it being 2 days of lying on the couch binging Netflix. And the reverse is true, that if you know what are the things that actually light you up, I have a teacher that often says, what are the foods that instantly light you up? Become aware. And so there's so much to it that can be actually really simple and is actually grounded in the simplicity of our day and how we manage our body. Yeah, it's. I think it's interesting.
And that must be interesting for you too, in the clients that come to you. Obviously they're coming for some kind of guidance. Do you notice any trends with that, of either particular things going on in people's charts or questions that people often come with?
Yeah, very much so. The clients that come to me tend to be going through some sort of shift in their life, or a major shift in their life. So people don't tend to come for entertainment. They come really with much deeper questions. And a reading space, no matter who you go to for a reading, really creates a sacred space where your life can be mirrored back to you. Okay? It's not so much certainly the way I practice astrology, it's not so much that you're going to be told what you need to do, although there will be guidelines and suggestions and all sorts of things that could be really helpful to you given what you're dealing with. But that it really is a place where people can tell the truth about what is going on in their life. It's a confidential space, and one where those places, I think, are sacred spaces when you can fully tell the truth and it not matter what you say, that you're held in that space. And so out of that can come what I think are really quite amazing shifts for people, because the astrology chart does provide a mirror to actually affirm who you are and affirm what you're going through. And of course, it actually gives some very major clues about how you may work with this energy, move out of those stuck spaces in your life, what it is that you're really needing to embrace at this time. I find themes occur around readings. So I'll have a week where it's a betrayal week. Everyone who turns up for a reading has suffered some sort of betrayal from a business partner, a lover, a betrayal from the past 20 years ago that they're only just able to heal. So I find that there's something that is resonating with people. And interestingly, if I'm in touch with myself and my own rhythms, there'll also be a lesson in it for me, that there'll be something in what comes to light in various readings that actually also reflects something that I may be working with in my own life. So, but I find that it's interesting because it'll be a career week where everyone's gone through a major career transition or redundancy or humiliation in the workplace or something. And so it's just, you can't make that up. It just, I don't know who's booking in and what they're coming with until they arrive at the session. But again, it shows to me that there are unknown or unrecognised cycles that are at work here. And I find that incredibly interesting.
Yeah. That is very interesting, those themes.
Yeah.
And you're highly intuitive, so you bring that other layer of reading and contribution. What role does that have? Because obviously there may be some people who read in a very technical way. Can you share more about your way?
Absolutely. For me, I love what intuition brings to a reading, that there's a depth that is created in that space, and not just my intuition that I bring to interpreting your chart, but it allows for the intuition of other people to actually step forward and say, yeah, I've been thinking about that for months. That's something I would really love to do. And for them to recognise that their own intuition has been playing a role or has been trying to speak to them in some way. So, but I actually find that intuition often fills the gaps for me in an astrology reading. Now, there are some brilliant technicians out there who will give you a phenomenal reading using astrology very much in the strict discipline of mathematics and logic and, you know, the movement of the planets. And I think we're drawn to the right astrologer to deliver the right message at the right time. And then there are others who actually bring in a different element to astrology, which is no better, but it is very different. And I think it allows really for what I'm going to describe as perhaps more of a soul experience. That's how I like to think of it anyway, that it's really a conversation not just between me and you, but your soul and my soul. And I feel that can be incredibly fruitful and affirming for people, because I think part of the journey in modern times is we may have these moments where we feel something deeply, or we intuitively we sense something, but we've been taught not to trust this in our culture. And I think a reading space actually does give a space where everything can be honoured, intuition as well. It's incredibly powerful.
And I love what you say about people almost feeling validated that these nudges that they're getting, or these things that they're experiencing, being mirrored back to them without them sharing or you knowing anything about their lives prior to that.
Absolutely. And we live in a culture that says, okay, I'm going to deal with it now. Let's deal with it. Right? Got to make a decision now. And often what comes up in a chart reading is this is a process, and it may take 18 months for you to get resolution around this. But these are the questions you'll be wrestling with. And it needs time. Okay? It needs perhaps stillness, or a whole lot of things. It could be anything, not just patience and stillness. It could require action. Maybe you've been sitting on this for 10 years, and what's required is action now at this part of the process. But for us to understand that it is not about instant gratification, that a reading won't give you every answer or make your decisions for you, but it is guidance. And that's what it has always been. That is what it is meant to be, to really help you uncover what perhaps is the most aligned path for you as you move forward in your life.
Yeah, and that's a very self-responsible, mature way of approaching it, right?
Absolutely.
I love that you were giving different sort of nudges of the sorts of actions or beingness that it's encouraging people to take or not take. Because in my limited experience, I mean, in Vedic astrology, there's lots of remedy and remedial astrology conversations. And I remember meeting this Western astrologer at Woodford Folk Festival, and he was the most blokey dude. And it was the astrology reading for the year ahead. And he was sitting next to me, and he was like, "What do you reckon of that?" And I thought, oh, this is a dude who just thinks this is rubbish. And so I was like, well, you know, these things are happening right now. And he just launched into this big conversation with me. He's a full-blown astrologer, and he was playing with the role of remedial astrology in the Western discipline, and how he feels like for some people that's been lost, and it becomes sort of like a two-dimensional reading. This is his experience of it. And he's like, look, when I did all these other things around it and did prayer and meditation and blessing and all these other things, he's like, my life changed. Like, yeah. So that level of self-responsibility and action or inaction or whatever's called for.
Absolutely. And you're right, it is a way that we've lost sight of in Western astrology of working with the chart. Some astrologers do it innately. They naturally offer this to their clients. But as a way of working with the chart, we don't language it that way.
Yeah.
There are still recommendations that we would make about how you would work with this in the chart.
Yeah.
But it's this beautiful acknowledgement that when you hold the question, you also hold the answer. Okay? That you just actually need, whether it's the time, whether it's the understanding, whether it's the insight. Maybe there's a lack of maturity on some level that you can't see the answer that's in front of you, that we need to grow and embrace before we can recognise that. There are many reasons for this, but I think that that's a beautiful acknowledgement of the remedy is also in the chart. The challenge may be depicted there, but the remedy is there as well.
Fascinating. And of course, many people may have seen that the interest in astrology or in spirituality and consciousness has surged in popularity. What excites you and what concerns you about this new quote-unquote mainstream interest?
Yeah, in the media, it's getting a lot of attention. So there's a lot of attention that millennials love astrology and that there's been this resurgence in astrology. To be honest, I think that there's always been an interest, and I believe that there always will be. I think that different generations are called to it for different reasons and to work with it perhaps in different ways. And that's that notion of evolution of the practice that we talked about previously. I think millennials are not clued in to some of the heavy social paradigms that perhaps people of my age, I'm in my late 50s, people of my age grew up with, that they actually are more curious and looking for modalities really that can reflect back to them self-knowledge and self-learning and all sorts of things. And it's just popping into my head. I think human design is a great example of that, and one that I really am keen to know more about, because it brings in some of the aspects of astrology, but actually also other information for people that really allows them to see what is your innate energy that you bring and how do you best use that. And again, it feels like it's a different dialect of the same language.
That's a great description. Yes. Do you know what? I found human design to be very validating for me. When I started understanding my my type. Yeah.
And I just love that there are now these, I don't even know what to call it other than an evolution. It's certainly not a hybrid, because as a discipline, it's valid in its own way. It has its own merit, and it's doing a lot of good in the world. It's helping a lot of people. Particularly people who are entrepreneurs, who are actually there's no boss to dictate or create the framework for them. They're really having to create everything from the ground up for themselves. And so that understanding can be incredibly powerful. So I'm excited to see where astrology goes in the coming years. And I think I love I don't know what millennials are going to do with it, but I love this idea that they'll actually adapt astrology to be relevant to today's times. Yeah.
I mean, we're already seeing that with astrology apps and people adding their friends or lovers or colleagues in to see the synastry charts and dynamics that people may or may not be dealing with, or that almost like a sense check, a weather
it is
forecast.
Like a weather forecast, isn't it? And that's how a lot of astrologers like to think of astrology. But exactly that without understanding any astrology, that you can have in your pocket, on your phone, something that really taps into your individual cycles in a way that even if you came to someone like me and had a reading, you couldn't do that every day. You might look at your chart, you may re-listen to the reading, and I just see this as a natural evolution and really even harnessing technology to make it more accessible to people. There are so many people out there that will never ever have an astrology reading, whether they can't afford it, whether it's just not their paradigm, and yet they will embrace things like a phone app. So I think that these things make astrology more readily accepted, and I think that that's always a good thing.
Yeah, that increase in access.
Yeah. For sure.
What role does AI have in all of this?
Oh, look, that's yet to be determined. But I will say on platforms like ChatGPT, it's amazing what ChatGPT will give you as an astrology reading if you plug in certain information. And of course, it's drawing from the history and the frameworks of astrologers who have been doing this for 30, 40, 50 years. So IP is a real issue. But it's actually sad to think when you read through the interpretation that you're given that AI is probably doing a better job than some astrologers. So, it's interesting. But there's always a bit of fantasy with astrologers, like what will reading a chart look like in the future? Will we be reading a hologram where it isn't just a two-dimensional depiction that we're looking at, that it really is maybe 3D or... we don't know, but I actually feel like astrology can help people through that AI transition, knowing it will actually influence every industry on the planet, including ours. But I think that, again, we will always come back to that notion of a sacred space is created by two or more people. It's not created by you interfacing with a computer screen. That may be informative, it may be insightful, it may be interesting, but it's not a sacred space.
Yes.
And I feel like if we're talking about these things like astrology being great tools for your spiritual evolution, for your soul evolution, I think we're always going to come back to an innate need to be with people, to be connected to people, to be connected with our hearts, from our hearts. And this is, I think, the one thing. Our practice may change. The tools that we use to describe as astrology and these cycles may change. But I think the key of being connected in a reading, and that this is a co-created space that reveals so much about who you are, I don't think that can be duplicated with AI. And I hope that that's the one piece that we do keep hold of.
That is a really powerful distinction to make there, Deb.
Thank you. Yeah.
Because I can imagine for lots of people in various sectors, there is some degree of anxiety about the future, and then for other people, excitement, and maybe a whole spectrum of emotions in between about what that future is going to bring. But also, and we've discussed this offline previously, that people's relationship to adopting digital technological, quote, advances or not, is going to be determined again by their unique paths.
Absolutely. And I think that astrology is always going to reveal what those personal lessons are for you. Even though it may change the way that we work and change the way that certain careers operate, again, I feel like the answers are found in the chart. What are the personal learnings for you? Where are the ways that you can adapt that actually usher in a new chapter for you? And it may not sit within the current paradigm or the way that we currently see the world. But like you were saying, the remedy is in the chart. And I feel like the way forward is still reflected in the chart. Yeah, for sure.
So looking into the sky now and in the years ahead, what are some interesting things that you see?
Yeah, look, we're really in interesting times. And again, there are so many great resources on the internet at the moment if you are curious. But there are all of the outer planets are changing signs and are currently at the early degrees, either 0 or 1 degree of their new sign. And so, again, it's a new era that is being ushered in. So most people have heard that Pluto has moved into Aquarius, and Pluto in Aquarius is often, Pluto is about power and how we wield power, how do we utilize our power. And it often, in the sign of Aquarius, is about bringing power back to the people. So it's actually about the fall of all of those social structures, where it be big government, where it be big pharma or big corporations. In the past, it would have been royalty. So the last time Pluto was in Aquarius was a time of revolution. We had the American Revolution, where they were rebelling, well, on the brink of the American Revolution, where they were rebelling against English rule. We had French Revolution, where they were overthrowing their monarchy and bringing in a very different form of governance. So I'm not saying that this is a time of revolution, but there is a sense of some of those old structures need to fall, and that we need to actually come forward with a notion or a new vision of how do we want to organise ourselves socially. What will social responsibility look like? What will community look like? And what do we want our communities to hold for us? The sign of Aquarius also rules tech. So when Pluto was in the sign of Capricorn, the focus was on big business and how corporations were shaping our social fabric, and how we were giving away our power to these corporations. Okay, now we can actually see the signs of big tech has the potential to liberate us, but also to hold that place that was once held by big corporations. And interesting in the way that tech will define our social relationships as we move forward. And if we're opting out of those discussions and those social responsibilities and living our life from our home in a little bit of a bubble and forgetting that we are connected, then big tech may make decisions that in 5 or 10 years we're not exactly happy with. Okay, but like you with your podcast, you can actually network with anyone in the world. Your guests could be anywhere, and that's incredibly miraculous. Like, that wasn't possible 20 years ago. So it remains to be seen to what degree this opens life for us and to what degree it shuts things down. But Pluto will be in Aquarius for the next 20 years and redefine our relationship to tech. Where are we giving our power away to tech? Where are we actually not even making decisions anymore? We're letting tech decide for us. So it's an interesting time. And then, we have the benefit that will bring, the health benefits, how it will radically revolutionise certain industries that will probably bring costs down somewhat, the cost of living down, particularly hopefully around health and things like that. Now, what's interesting at this time, Uranus, the great liberator, the planet of freedom and revolution and liberation, this year has just moved into Gemini, and it's about to retrograde and go back into the final degrees of Taurus. But in Gemini, it actually trines Pluto, which is a really beneficial relationship. And we've had enormous leaps in communication in past eras when these two have trined each other. So the last obvious one was the telegraph, and the notion of, in the late 1800s, well, here in Australia, it came in the 1800s, but that notion of connectedness, that we're all connected and can communicate with each other no matter where you are in the world. Those cables are being laid under the ocean that actually gave rise to, the Titanic can go down off the coast of England and people hear about it within hours through Morse code and the telegraph. And certainly in Australia, it opened up communications and the country to to us as well. You know, we were really developing as a nation during those times. So we do know that communication is going to change radically. It will probably also bring in changes, being in Gemini, Uranus being in Gemini, probably bring in big changes to transport and the way we do transport. So we're already hearing companies like Google that are saying, we want a drone fleet that will absolutely deliver something to your door within hours, rather than Pony Express, Australia Post, delivering it and taking, even when they do a great job, it still takes a couple of days. So we have this notion that while these planets are in a beneficial relationship to each other, humanity will make huge leaps, particularly around communication, which is quite interesting. We've also got the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which we're in the middle of at this time. And the Saturn-Neptune, kind of opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Saturn is very real world and practical and, about applying to a very specific outcome. Neptune feels more nebulous and dreamy. It's about the higher vision. It's about creativity and our spirituality. And they're coming together in the sign of Aries, which they haven't done for centuries. Like some people are even saying not since, the 4th century.
Oh.
I know. I haven't researched it myself, but there's some interested people who are, astrologers who are. It's quite interesting. So they're saying, even though Saturn-Neptune follows a 36-year cycle, we've never seen it in the time of Aries, not to our knowledge. So there are people speculating that it will be the time of the spiritual warrior, that Aries energy is asking people to stand up and be counted for the things that they believe in, which is Neptune. Okay. Now it's interesting, in previous cycles, in 1989, Saturn-Neptune was in Capricorn, and we saw the fall of communism, the Iron Curtain. So there was revolution in Czechoslovakia, Romania. Suddenly these weren't hidden countries anymore. And it culminated with the fall of the Berlin Wall, like literally Saturn, literally being a wall. And we saw Neptune dissolving that wall virtually overnight. Now what's interesting with that story at the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall is it was through a whole lot of misunderstandings.
Yes.
That it just suddenly happened. Okay, so, and it's interesting that Neptune in its lower vibration often brings in miscommunication, misunderstandings, confusion. People thinking that they're both on the same page, but they're not. They're actually have a very different understanding, and that promotes confusion. And so it's quite interesting that there was confusion over the time that they were the government was announcing that people would be enabled to travel more freely. They were never ever going to dismantle the wall, but they were making steps to bring more freedom to the people in East Germany at the time. And through some confusion over when it was actually to happen, they opened the gates and people just not fled across the border, but moved across the border in record numbers. And of course, when the story came to light that the government was going to allow more accessible travel, people started gathering at the gates in record numbers that were too much for, a handful of guards to manage. And so in that Neptune confusion, the Berlin Wall fell. So there's always something in a Saturn-Neptune conjunction that an old form, Saturn, is being asked to die. It will be dissolved by the energy of Neptune. The energy of Neptune in its higher form is a new vision. So you actually see something that needs to decay and give way to that old form to give way. And a new vision and an inspired vision, one that can actually, people can get behind. And hopefully one that honours people. I often think it being a spiritual vision, but it's not about the lofty notion of spirituality. It's about honouring of our humanity. To me, that's how I like to interpret perhaps a spiritual vision for humanity, is one that often honours our humanness and honours, the unique, I don't know, everyone's just so unique. There will never be another Sarah, no matter how we try to construct that or clone that or what have you. There is something that is beautifully unique about each person and what they bring. And at its best, that's what Neptune can honour. More of a spiritual vision. Neptune isn't necessarily a moral planet, but I do actually think it can bring in a new moral vision for the times, and one that actually informs the next era of 36 years. So it's quite interesting to see which, in that conjunction, which is going to be the dominant planet. In the 1950s, 52 and 53, we had the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Libra. But Saturn was the dominant planet there. And decisions that were made by governments at that time were built on fear, which is the lower vibration of Saturn. So we had huge propaganda in the 1950s across all countries. We had the Cold War that was going on, where, kids in primary schools were hiding under their desks in case we got bombed by the Russians. And in the US, you had all of that. It really was a witch hunt around communism. Who was a communist? Who was disloyal to the country? And that whole Hollywood, it had its most visible impact in Hollywood because there were, because Hollywood is such an influence, not just in America, but to the whole world. There really was this thing of which writers, which actors, which person. There was even Lucille Ball at one time was accused of being a communist. And hers was the most popular, I Love Lucy at that time, was the most popular TV show on US television. She was the darling of the US, and yet she was brought before the Senate committee to testify and prove that she was not a communist. So it's interesting where that Saturn in its fear can actually persecute people for their beliefs, which is Neptune. So it really is a time for us to decide, and the timing was smack bang in the middle of it. In June they came the closest that they came to the conjunction in Aries. They were minutes apart from joining fully as a conjunction. It's in February of next year that conjunction becomes exact. So we're in a time of reflection where we've actually seen a glimpse of what came to light this year around June. Okay, and actually being asked to choose with some awareness around what are our choices as a culture. Now, some of this is synchronistic. We can't control it. Things come to light at particular times that really embody the zeitgeist of the time. And we're all being asked to work with it or to go with it in some way. But I do believe we've got a personal choice. Are we going to live in fear, which is the Saturn dominant part of this conjunction? Or are we going to recognise that some things have come to a close or an end, and to embrace a different future? We need a new vision, which is the higher expression of Neptune.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, so we are in changing times, and government policy, we all sit back and we watch government policy unfold, but we actually forget that we get to decide what happens in our communities. That we don't have to be passive in this. That it's not about Saturn, an authority figure, imposing a paradigm on us. Okay, whatever the paradigm, it doesn't matter what side of politics, they're all as bad as each other. Okay, but that Neptune is really about that call to really recognise our humanity and treat people accordingly. I actually think it could usher us into oneness and the recognition that we really are all one. So how it will play out, we're yet to see, but I really do hope, I can see the potentials there. And even for those of you who are listening, even just recognising in your own life, what is it that's dissolving? Okay, let it go. Let it go. And where do you need a new vision for your life? Where do you need a new vision? Is it in your career? Is it in your relationship? Where is that? And just know that now is the time to ask those questions, to embrace something new, and actually get clear on what that is for you.
Yeah. Thanks, Deb. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm really curious to unpack more about Saturn, because I think for some people it's a planet that maybe has negative connotations or overly simplified connotations, but we sometimes kind of forget that the historical relationship that, for example, the Romans had, they had Saturnalia, and that was people having a great old time.
Absolutely.
So can you explain more about what our relationship or relationships have been to Saturn and its higher and lower potentials?
Look, I can only really talk about it from a Western perspective and how I was taught to look at Saturn. But we all need a dose of Saturn. Saturn is the reality check in our lives. And we all need a dose of Saturn in whatever we're manifesting or trying to create. Because Saturn actually brings things into physical form, literally. Excuse me. And Saturn is there's a lot of good stuff about Saturn. Saturn tends to get a bad rap.
Yeah, I like to think of it as the school principal, like the nice school principal. Yeah.
And sadly, Saturn has the reputation of the old school principal, where you be sent to the office and you get the strap. Okay, so it is actually looking at your relationship with Saturn. For some people, they do Saturn really well. They're practical, they get stuff done, they're hardworking, they're industrious, they're responsible. And these are the great qualities of Saturn. Okay, Saturn is about committed. They're actually happy to step up and make a commitment and see that commitment through. It's the positive of Saturn. Okay, and other people struggle with Saturn. The routine, the consistency, dare I say, for some people it is responsibility, taking on responsibility to begin with. But embracing our Saturn is part of what being a grown-up is about. And that's actually how I like to look at it. Because even as an adult, there's still, there's still lifespan development that happens. Just because you hit adulthood doesn't mean your growing is finished. There's a real sense of, there's moral development, social development. We continue to grow. And Saturn, often, when you have a Saturn transit, it's really calling you to grow up in some way. It's calling you to embrace the next level of adult responsibility for you. Okay? And really step into it used to be called civic responsibility. Okay? Back in the 50s, 60s, was your responsibility as a citizen, the things you did to keep your communities operating and functional. And now somehow we've lost sight of that. We think everything's the government's responsibility. Now, government is an expression of Saturn. But again, it's us shirking our Saturn responsibilities as an individual, as a neighbourhood, as a school community, as a religious community, and expecting that Saturn, the government, will take care of everything. In its negative, Saturn can be very rule-bound. These are the rules, you'll do as you're told, you'll follow the structure. Okay, it does bring structure to your life, and that can be a really positive thing. But you can see when Saturn is over-functioning. It can be controlling. It can be, you don't need to think, you just do as you're told. Okay, so we can see that old school paradigm, how it was a generation ago. I think Saturn is more about embracing personal responsibility. And although it will play out on a social level, of course it will. It is about how we operate in society. I feel like that comes from people taking personal responsibility for their life. And I want to avoid responsibility at times as much as the next person, but it always comes back to, again, I need a grown-up takes responsibility for their own needs and the needs of others to some degree, whoever you're responsible to or responsible for. And somehow that's become a little bit blurred. Okay. So we all know people who are very Saturnian, who are very rule-driven, and probably that they're the people that give Saturn a bit of a bad rap. But for anything to be done, for anything to be achieved, for there to be social order and safety in our world, we need a good dose of Saturn. Okay. And interestingly, with it sitting right next to Neptune at the moment, we've got a chance to redefine what this is going to be. Where it sits at the 0 point of Aries will actually sextile to Pluto. So it brings in transformation that can be positive. Okay, particularly around the role of tech in society. And I think, and again, bringing power back to the people. But for power to come back to the people in a way that actually is productive and empowered, people have to be willing to take responsibility. You can't expect mummy and daddy, that is, the government of your country or your boss, to actually provide it all for you. And with economies facing what they're facing, as communities, I think we're going to be called to really decide what is important that we fund, because logistically speaking, we may not be able to fund it all, particularly if people don't want to raise taxes or pay their tax. I'm hoping it will bring in tax reform for those big multinational companies that are avoiding tax in all countries, or paying $4 tax. We've all heard those stories in the media. And I'm hoping that could be a practical demonstration of power of the people, insisting that these people, if they're making money from us, that they need to contribute to our communities. So all of this remains to be seen, but I think we can put Saturn to use in a really productive way and challenge some of those myths about Saturn being so restrictive or limiting.
That's really valuable to outline.
Yeah.
Thanks, Deb.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Deb, there's an aspect of astrology that I find really interesting, and that is, amongst many things, astrocartography. Can you please unpack that for us a little? Yeah,
sure. There are some astrologers who specialise in this, and it is incredibly valuable. So there are many disciplines that recognize that there are energy grids and energy lines around the planet. We often recognize ley lines, that is the energy lines within the earth, but we often forget that there is a sky grid, okay, that is just as powerful and just as relevant to us. And your own personal astrology chart can act like a ley line, taking your chart and actually transposing it over a particular area or a particular country, and actually seeing what parts of your chart activate when you do that. So some people use it to try to manipulate what they think is going to happen in their chart. That is, they find that they may be living on their Saturn line and find that life is challenging, it's difficult, lots of responsibility, not a lot of joy. And they might actually explore, what if I move to Brisbane? What if I move to LA? What if I move to London? How would my chart configure then? And so they may find that there are other influences that they choose to live on or with, simply because their chart is activated in a more positive way in a particular country or a particular city. Now, for example, my own chart, my Jupiter line runs through LA. Now, I live in the city of Melbourne, Australia, and I have no planetary lines when I cast my chart over Australia. There's no lines that run through Melbourne, none whatsoever. Does that mean Melbourne's bad for me? No, it just means it doesn't activate anything in my chart. Now, in my late 20s, I went to live in Cairns for a while, and my Neptune runs right through Cairns. Neptune is, among other things, the planet of spirituality, and I had one of my first spiritual awakenings while I was there in Cairns. It just opened up so much, that city, that time, that environment that I was in really was a Neptunian time, and I gained a lot from it. Most of us are sitting on something and we have no idea what is being activated. But when I was learning this, when I was first studying astrology, our teacher, remember the old overhead projectors?
Yeah.
And remember the transparency that you would have to write on or put things on? Well, he put everyone's chart. He gave us one each. Here's your chart. It's on an overhead transparency. And he said, now put it over the map of Melbourne and have a look at your neighbourhood. What line are you sitting on? Well, I thought I was so clever as a student because I had to move house while I was studying with him. And I chose to go to a neighbourhood where my Venus line would run straight through that area of Melbourne. And at the time, I was going to find the love of my life because I was determined that living on my Venus line would create that for me. And really, nothing happened. I just got fat and lazy, which was the negative expression of Venus. And I actually went back to my teacher and said, why? Tell me why. And he said, because you forgot to look at what other planets are aspecting Venus. He said, your Venus isn't easy. So if you were expecting that it would bring in an easy life, it didn't. It wasn't a bad life, but it didn't bring in the love of my life that I hoped it would. So it's quite interesting that it's not just, there's a whole discipline to this, is what I'm trying to say, which is incredibly interesting. If you start exploring this, you will go down a rabbit hole that takes you anywhere and everywhere, okay? But it is just keeping in mind that not all things are equal, that some planets are easy in your chart, even if it's Saturn. for you in your chart, that could be a really easy planet. You do Saturn really easily. And someone else who struggles living on their Saturn line will be challenging. There's a couple of things that are interesting. And they involve the archetypes of the planet. So have you ever travelled to those places where you just immediately feel at home?
Yep.
You even sit there and go, I could live here.
Yeah, heaps of times.
Well, chances are that your moon line runs through that country or that area. Okay, the moon is familiar, it's comfortable, it's home. Okay, and so again, if you've got a moon that's quite healthy and functional, most of us are happy to live on our moon line. It allows us to feel like we belong, even if we're totally unfamiliar with the culture or the people.
Wow.
Yeah. So your Jupiter line often is said to bring in opportunity, okay, and it may actually bring in educational opportunities or opportunity for travel. If you're in business and you're putting your business chart over a country, it's often a place where there'll be a huge expansion for you, that you may actually find my business might take off in a particular country. Your business, if your Jupiter line runs through it, that's where you'll suddenly go, oh my God, the US market just opened up overnight and all my orders are coming out of New York. So it's really interesting. And for me personally, I registered my business at a particular time to take advantage of a particular planetary lineup. And unbeknownst to me, my Mercury in the business chart runs straight through Melbourne. And at the time I was living interstate and I had all of this work coming out of Melbourne. I would jump on a plane every month and go down to Melbourne for a week. Loved it. Loved jumping on a plane. But I couldn't work out what's happening with Melbourne now that I don't live there. Melbourne's just taken off. And it was because in the chart, the registering of the business and formalising the business was the birth of the business. And lo and behold, that Mercury is commerce, among other things.
Oh.
Okay, and my business, like a lot of businesses, is developed predominantly through word of mouth, and that's Mercury. So there's so much to this. I know we can't do it justice here today, but I really encourage people, whatever part of astrology you're drawn to, have a play, really explore it. Because there are insights that really you may stumble across, and I think you will stumble across them, that really just open up so many possibilities for you. And it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, Deb, you have so much knowledge in your noggin. Wow, there is so much to learn, and I'm so grateful for this lifetime of knowledge that you've been able to share with us today. It's
thank you.
Cool.
Do you know, most people who are serious about astrology will acknowledge that they still, on some level, feel like a beginner, simply because there's so much more to draw you in, to learn about, to share. But I've loved being a part of this today, so thank you.
Oh.
And I hope people get something out of this as well.
For sure, absolutely. And as a human, an astrologer, a seeker, what's something that you're contemplating or exploring or learning about at the moment?
Yeah, look, I'm embracing the elements and how they work with astrology. Now, when you're learning astrology, it's one of the first things that you learn, the 4 elements: fire, earth, air, and water. And we learn them in terms of where the planets fall, when they fall in that particular element in your chart, it brings a particular quality to that planet. I'm actually looking at planetary cycles that are so much bigger. So we've all heard of, well, maybe not all of us, but in astrology we've recognised that some cycles, like the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction that happen every 20 years, follow 200-year cycles where they're in earth signs for 200 years. And we've had the year before, we had the first of the Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions in the element of air. It happened at 0 degrees Aquarius. So this ushers in a new 200-year cycle where air is about communication, it's about ideas, it's about the exchange of ideas, it's about invention, it's about new varieties and experiences of things we've known forever. In Earth, it oversaw the whole industrial revolution. Okay, Earth is about big business, but it's about all of those things, money. It's about social structures. It's about all of those things, and we saw during the Industrial Revolution, societies across the world change from an agricultural economy to people coming off the land and moving into the factories. And actually it was about consumerism, it was about capitalism. It's really where capitalism developed and took off in a huge way. And so we actually see that this 200-year cycle of air with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction may bring in ideas being more important, leading to new technologies, new developments, new paradigms about the way we live and or communicate. So we don't know what that will bring. 200 years is a long time, but that notion that certain cycles call for us to embrace something different. And I'm really exploring that with astrology at the moment. Now, when I was learning, there was such a rush to get to what I thought was the good stuff, the planets, the signs, the aspects. I didn't really care much about the elements. Okay, but you don't have to understand astrology to get a lot out of working with elemental cycles. You see this in so many different disciplines, feng shui. There are certain medicines and healing techniques that work with the elements. And so I love that simplicity, that there can be so much richness even in its simplest form. And I think that's what I'm trying to reconnect with. That's really what excites me at the moment.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And what's something that you just wish people knew or understood about astrology?
Yeah, look, I wish people understood the value of astrology a little more. And I think the onus is on us as astrologers to communicate that. I don't think we've done a great job of educating people. And I don't mean that in a sarcastic way, but to really answer people's questions and really communicate the validity of it. But there's so much richness in your chart, and that you can revisit it again and again and again, and that each time it can actually give you a very different perspective on what is needed for you to be able to move forward and move towards a life that is really truly aligned to what I want to say is your authentic expression, or more authentic expression. And I think that could be the job of the astrological community, is rather than just providing guidance or education for people who are interested in astrology, maybe it's our time to stand up and be counted and actually, educate ordinary people who may not have been exposed to these modalities, but to actually help convey or help people understand how they can use this for their own benefit. Yeah.
Deb, I've really appreciated the breadth and depth of your wisdom, and also how grounded you make these subjects for people and really bring them to life with these practical examples. It's just amazing.
Thank you. I've so enjoyed our time together. It's been lovely.
Me too. Is there any final thoughts before we wrap up today?
So many of us are sitting on our gifts and our talents, me included. And I've just got to say, you are needed in the world. It is time to stand up. It is time to put ourselves out there. No matter how big or how small, it really is. Your gifts are necessary. They are needed in the world. And I think it's time. It really, really is time. So good luck.
Thanks, Deb.